My early days of school were very difficult. I usually found myself hiding in the cupboards or in the playground away from everyone. The kids were very mean and I disliked the nicknames that they repeatedly called me. I remember one particular day while I was playing out in the schoolyard with a few insects and iguana, when someone behind me hurled a piece of wood which missed me and seriously injured the iguana. I remember letting out a scream as I turned and charged towards the boy responsible. He bolted into a nearby classroom, locking the door behind him. I could hear him and his friends laughing and cheering each other on from the other side of the door. What a coward, I thought. I walked back to the iguana. His body was crushed by the weight and force of the log of wood, and he was bleeding badly. Tears welled up as I sat beside him, wishing it was me that the piece of wood had hit. A faint voice soon interrupted my sorrowful state as I gazed at iguana. Numbed and somewhat bewildered, I looked around to see if this was another boyish prank designed for my demise, or was I dreaming? "No trick," the iguana said. "What's wrong with you?" Surprised, I listened to my dying friend. "Jason, most people are not able to hear nature communicating to them. Unlike you, they are hypnotized by the environment in which they are born and raised up in. Do not allow it to happen to you too. Your innocence is your savior." I gazed into his eyes in search of answers to a sudden flow of rising questions, but in return I felt a strong pulsating current of energy streaming from his eyes into mine. Before I could find relevant words to say, the iguana sank flat to the ground, exhaled his last breath and passed over. Several years later I found myself working for my father, running a catering and food delivery business. That's after I had been rejected by most of the jobs I had applied for due to lack of experience, and it's sort of a catch-22 situation. I worked hard and I learned everything I needed to know in order to keep the family business afloat and profitable. I think my dad was proud of me, although he rarely showed it. He was from the old school. He only stopped working when the job was done, not before, and he expected the same work ethic from me. My father passed away several years later from a sudden heart attack and left Mum with the challenges of running and managing the family business. The onus had fallen on me as the oldest child to take ownership of the business, and I was ill prepared, yet what other option did I have? Mum was depending on me and I couldn't let her down. After returning home from the office one evening, I decided to catch up on some reading. I soon fell asleep on the lounge chair when I dreamt of my niece being pregnant. I rang her the following morning to congratulate her. She didn't say much, only agreed with what I was saying. I sensed she thought I had been drinking or something to that effect. The following night I again had the same dream. When I mentioned it to her, she told me that her doctor said it was nearly impossible for her to fall pregnant due to the complications in her ovaries. I left it at that. Weeks later she called me and said she had just come back from the doctors with confirmation that she was indeed pregnant. The fraternity of doctors at her hospital were still trying to fathom the odds of her being pregnant, and so they wanted to see her again to run further tests. Listening to her excitement over the phone was all I needed to verify the divine providence that enveloped my life continually, and I was obviously happy that she was happy. A week before she gave birth, I had a dream that the child would soon die after. I couldn't sleep much that week and remember crying to God for some relief and divine assistance in this matter. In the early hours of the morning when the child was born, I heard a voice vibrating clearly through my inner ear. "What is your price? What are you willing to give me in return?" Take my life, I pleaded internally before losing consciousness. Later that morning, the phone rang with the good news of a baby girl. I rushed to the hospital praying that God would spare her life in answer to my pleas. On my way there, I stopped at the lights behind a car with a bumper sticker that read, "Live each day as if it were your last. It just might be." Intuitively, I recognized the divine answer to my prayers, and with gratitude and humility thanked the Lord for His intervention. The family business was flourishing, and we were looking to expand overseas. I started to diversify and invest in other areas that would give us residuals and high returns. Business was booming and everything was going great. My personal life, however, was spiraling out of control as I integrated my business successes with social events and sensual pleasures. The thought of God seemed a distant memory, but not for long. What goes up eventually comes down. It was 1987 and the stock market fell to an all-time low. Businesses were crashing and fortunes were being lost around the world. My investments dwindled to -0, and by the end of the financial year my family business was several $1,000,000 in debt. I sold a lot of real estate and personal belongings that I had acquired to pay off most of the outstanding debts. God had brought me to my knees once again and reminded me of the promise I had once made. After some thought, I decided to leave the family business for my mother to manage while I travelled abroad. I needed some time out and Hawaii seemed to be the perfect destination. Mum told me that I had family there that I had not yet met, and this would be a great opportunity to do so. I arrived in Hawaii late in the afternoon. I quickly made some arrangements to go sightseeing at certain tourist spots, before spoiling myself to a nice hot spa and some much-needed rest. I woke up early and made my way to the famous Waikiki beach. It was a beautiful sunny day, no clouds in the sky. I stripped down to my shorts and lay there on the beach, anticipating a nice bronze tan that I would hopefully materialize in time. As I lay there, I drifted off into a dream. I saw myself making my way to nearby markets where I was intercepted by a young boy who looked apprehensive and somewhat troubled. He kept grabbing my hand and pointing us to go to a certain place. He wanted me to follow him. So I did. I was led to a 2-story house not far from the hotel and the beach. An old lady welcomed me with great excitement. She spoke very briefly about my appearance before directing me to sit on the chair in the center of a sitting room. She then whispered instructions to the young boy who I came with, and he notified several others that I had arrived. Soon, several tribal elders entered the room, and with a smile and a nod of acknowledgement, they positioned themselves around the room facing me. I was reluctant to stay seated, but the lady reassured me that it was okay. All is well. My curiosity soon subsided when 3 individuals entered the room. Those in the room already bowed in respect. These 3, who I later discovered were the Princess of Hawaii and her advisors, quietly removed their robes and made their way to seats prepared for them, also on the outskirts of the room. It was an awkward occasion and I was feeling way out of place. I had an unexpected audience that apparently needed my attention for reasons unknown to me. An inner voice reassured me that I would be safe. One of the advisors spoke first, making me aware that the princess's uncle was seriously ill and that the princess was hopeful for my assistance. I questioned him as to why she did not ask her doctors or healers to do the healing. They all laughed and started to chat amongst themselves. I was wondering what the joke was. An old man who looked to be in his 80s and who was seated directly opposite the princess stood up, said something to the honorary guests, then made his way towards me. In perfect English, he told me that I would be staying with him for the next 7 days, and at the end of these 7 days the healing would be complete. He then turned to the princess and her advisors, bowed and excused the both of us. I went back to the hotel that afternoon with the intention of relocating first thing in the morning. I was not a happy man. The last thing I wanted to do on my holiday was to do healing on anyone, let alone spend it with some old man I didn't care to know. That night I had an unusual dream. 3 cars drove by as I stood on an island in the middle of the road. Each car had a specific word in bold letters emblazoned on each of their number plates. Stop, listen, learn. It was apparently clear to me that God was trying to tell me that something important was about to take place in my life, and I needed to pay attention. I woke up early the following morning to a knock on the door. 2 men dressed in native traditional attire urged me to follow them. I thanked them for the wake-up call and told them to come back when it was daylight. God sure has a sense of humor, I thought. Before I could find the bed again, God demonstrated his humor by having these kind gentlemen launch me into their waiting vehicle, head first. I was then driven to some remote island village where I was to resume my lessons or training or something. The old man from the day before emerged from behind the bushes, after doing his business I presume, and proceeded to look me up and down before giving me that smirk my older brother usually gave me, just before he dished out some brotherly love. I knew I was in for a hard week just by the look on his face. If I could describe hell, this would be close to it, with this old man as the ringleader and my older brother as his right-hand man. The morning sun was now gracing our village with its much-needed warmth as I followed the old man to a hut where we were to have breakfast. No words were ever spoken, but I could sense strong energy. During breakfast, something really strange happened that on paper would sound so far-fetched that even I wouldn't believe it. There were 10 of us, 9 village elders and myself, sitting on the floor around this long coffee table. Once the blessing of the food was completed, each elder, one by one, would levitate, each holding onto their plates as they continued eating, an obvious normality. I kept eating, pretending not to notice this phenomenon while my intellectual mind was trying, unsuccessfully I might add, to comprehend it all. Breakfast soon ended and I was led to the center of a circle of local tribesmen. The old man grabbed a small branch and wrote in the sand who he thought I was and what I was to do. Simultaneously I could hear his voice speaking to me, a telepathic power he obviously possessed. You are part of the chosen few, he said before continuing. I was led to you by our great ancestors and was told that if the princess's uncle was to live, we needed to find you. The old man continued to tell me about why it was necessary for me to adhere to the dream I had prior to being escorted here. He said that the next 7 days would be crucial for me as they would affect everything I said and did for the rest of my life, including millions of lives yet to be born. The old man finally stopped speaking and led me to the tallest tree in the forest, where I was to learn my first lesson. I was to climb as high as I could and wait there until an eagle was kind enough to give me one of its feathers, or I kill it and remove one of its feathers. Either way, I was going to possess an eagle's feather or die trying. An image of bones hanging on top of a tree in the middle of a sunny tropical Hawaii, with an accompanying story of an idiot who tried to catch an eagle, was not a sight or life story I wanted to be remembered for. With the right motivation, 2 spearheads lightly touching my back, I began my ascent. Upon reaching the highest point, I made myself as comfortable as I possibly could, considering the situation. Several hours passed and it didn't take long before I was daydreaming about the Oriental Master in the Karate Kid movie, wondering what he would do under similar circumstances. Then I realized that no one in their right mind would actually be in this situation. Looking down at the forest floor with the ocean to my left was a sight to behold. I could see the edge of the world in either direction. It was actually reminding me of Columbus, the famed explorer. My mind wandered freely, unearthing memories of friends and family, relatives and foes. Soon my mind returned to its cage as I recalled a thought from a past philosopher. The world is a mirror giving back to each man a reflection of himself. What do I see in me, I thought. My analysis of myself had been negative till now, and my mind seemed to highlight my many inadequacies and insecurities. The longer I hung from the tree, the more I realized that it was my limiting beliefs that were the cause of my present predicament. Perhaps if I were to view the world like Columbus and open my mind to the possibilities of sailing uncharted waters and discovering new worlds of thought, I would find that elusive happiness I so longed for. As I reflected on this world's history, the people that made the greatest impact were those who saw what the rest of the world failed to see. They did what the rest of the world refused to do. And they believed in themselves when the rest of the world ridiculed and shunned them. A layer, a thin cloud, moved past me as my heart pounded with new insight. It was as if a weight had been lifted. My attention was suddenly interrupted by a squawk. A feather had fallen on my lap by an eagle flying by. I couldn't believe it. This is impossible, is it? Without hesitation, I quickly made my way down the tree, thanking God profusely for the lesson. With obvious emergency, I ducked behind nearby bushes to answer the call of nature. What timing! Before the sun rose on the second day, the two kind gentlemen that drove me to the village from my hotel came to wake me up. They were glad, though somewhat surprised, to see me ready and waiting. We had breakfast, muesli porridge with some soya milk and toast. It was nice, but a little too healthy for me. What happened the day before happened again. They ate while suspended in the air, all the while without any verbal communication. Real weird stuff, I thought. After breakfast, the old man took me to a hut, sat me down and proceeded to tell me what the day's events would consist of. I was to be escorted to the foot of the highest mountain in the nearby region. I was to climb the mountain alone until I found some rare white and gold flower which can only be found there. I was to remain there at the point where the flower is found till the sun had set before returning to camp, which meant I'd be making my way back in the dark. You have to be kidding me, right? I said as I looked into his eyes for some sign of sarcasm. His return glance merely affirmed his decision. Well, I'm not going, I insisted. I don't care what you say, I'm not going. The first 100 yards of the climb was okay, but gradually each step that followed began to weigh on me, and I was beginning to feel the burn. I stopped occasionally to rest and to look around for this rare flower. Sometimes I would stop just long enough for the pain in my legs to subside whilst taking in the view. It was beautiful. The land and mountain range was green and lush, and the scenery was as majestic as the hand that created it. Upon reaching one peak of the mountain, another would appear, and then another. The air was getting thin, and so was I. I finally stopped the climb temporarily and grabbed something to bite from the sack the old man had provided me. I was enjoying the loaf of bread when I bit down on something hard. I removed an old coin from my mouth. On one side of the coin were inscribed the words, "In God we trust," and on the other side was the face of a clock, an unusual coin with no year or country of origin inscribed. Pondering on this unusual coin and the clock face, I realized how I was always chasing time and how accustomed I was to its trappings. Always rushing to meetings or having to be at some place at a certain time, and never really stopping to see what was really important to me. Enough thinking, I thought. I better get going if I'm to find this flower. As I reached to pick up the rest of my belongings, a ray of light reflected off something near my sack. I looked to see what it was, and to my surprise I saw the rare white and gold flower. Suddenly, as if my eyes had been opened, I could see the flowers everywhere. I had passed them all the way up without realizing it. Sometimes what we're looking for is right in front of us. Once again, I thanked God for the lesson and waited patiently for the sun to set before making my way down. It was dark and I had left several markers on my way up, so I was hoping my memory and good fortune would serve me well on my descent. Going down the mountain was harder than I thought. I stumbled twice and I still had not yet descended the first hill. I remembered the coin, "In God we trust." In my heart I was afraid to trust anyone. I'd been hurt before and my relationships with girlfriends were pathetic. Every time I gave my love to someone, they abused it and left me with the bill. I knew the pain, and I knew I didn't want to feel that pain again, ever. So how can I trust God? Will He hear me this time? After glancing back through the memory banks of my life and realizing how God had been a major influence in my successes, I offered a simple prayer. I figured, what have I got to lose? So far, everything's been working out amazingly, and left myself in God's hands. A strange energy came over me and I felt an invisible hand guiding my every step. I remembered something a good friend of mine had said in passing conversation. A person who wants fire is cheered by feeling warmth and then joyously looks for the blaze. A person who is looking for God, once they taste and feel His presence, will ever afterwards keep searching for Him until they realize that what they are seeking is a blaze within. I arrived safely back at the village and was greeted by a wall of warriors who were delighted to see me. As I lay my head to rest for that night, I was overcome with tears. I couldn't understand, nor could I fathom these past days' experiences. They simply fanned a fire in me for a more personal relationship with God. It was all too much. The sleep was great till my two indigenous friends threw water on me around 4 a.m. I thanked them for the kind act and wished I could meet their mothers to tell them how great their sons turned out. It was the least I could do. It was the third day and, like clockwork, I made my way to the bathroom before being led to the breakfast hut. Breakfast was everything I expected, the usual food and the levitation accompanied with a silent communication. After breakfast, the old man disclosed the day's activities and congratulated me on the successes of the past 2 days. I'm sure he was surprised at the outcome as much as I was, although he didn't show it. Today I was to spend time fishing with the men of the village. It sounded great until he mentioned the part where I was to catch a fish that was to feed the entire village. An hour or so had passed and I found myself at sea with a boat of experienced fishermen. They handed me a hook and bait to use. Then they resumed their own fishing. I stood there thinking to myself, how am I going to catch a whale with this? We had started early and by midday the canoe was filling fast with a multitude of various types of fish, of which none was mine. It was as if the fish knew where my hook was and made it a point not to make my day. By late afternoon the men were ready to return and thank goodness I caught one. When I pulled the snapper in, no one said anything, not even a giggle. They simply looked at the fish, then made preparations to return to the village. There was no remark from anyone. However, I could sense a lot of energy moving about the boat, so much so that my head started to ache. Upon returning, I presented the snapper to the old man, before requesting leave in order to alleviate myself of the headache. It didn't take long before I was sound asleep. I was given 2 dreams. First I saw a young Indian elephant being trained. When the elephant was young, one of its rear legs was tied to a tree stump to stop it from roaming. After many years I saw this same elephant, now much stronger and huge in size with the ability to carry large objects and push trees aside, still hindered from roaming by a simple rope tied to its hind leg and a stake in the ground. The second dream was short but needed no explanation. One of the wealthiest men in the world lay on his deathbed alone. After signalling the reporter over, he began to unfold his deepest regret in life. "If I had just one wish, just one," he whispered, "it would be this. When I was younger, I wanted to change the world, but no one would listen. I then tried to implement change in my country, but no one wanted anything to do with me. After trying unsuccessfully, I tried to influence those closest to me, and even they laughed at my preposterous ideas." He took a deep breath, then continued, Maybe if I had realized sooner, if only I had changed me, then perhaps, just maybe, my family would have respected me more. Through their influence, the community would have been more accepting of my ideas and views, and in turn I would have made a greater impact in this country and possibly the world. I only wish I had changed me. Then just maybe. Before I could reflect on what I had just witnessed, I was interrupted from my sleep. A young warrior told me that the tribe was waiting for me. There was a small fire burning in the center of the village. The men were seated in a large circle around the fire, and the rest of the villagers were seated behind them. The old man stood next to the fire with a knife in one hand and the snap I had caught in the other. The young warrior led me to the old man, then took his seat with the rest of the group. The old man mumbled a few words, then sang and danced around the fire. The rest of the villagers hummed in tune whilst punching the ground in unison. I stood there dumbfounded and amazed. What's happening? And what am I supposed to do? I thought to myself. The singing soon came to an abrupt end, and the old man told me to hold out my hands. I was hesitant at first, but an inner voice told me to trust him. He placed the fish I caught in my hands before me and proceeded to cut it in half. Blood oozed freely from the severed fish. Amidst the blood appeared several large stones. The old man picked up one of these stones and with his handkerchief wiped away the blood. Sitting in his hand, much to my amazement, was the biggest rock diamond I had ever seen. I couldn't believe it. It was more than enough to feed the village. There was a sudden silence. Everyone's hands were raised to the heavens as prayers were sent in gratitude to the divine. I joined in as I came to the realization of a higher power governing and protecting my life. It was definitely directing my life towards a higher purpose. As I lay in bed, I thanked God for the lessons of the day. I thanked him for the lesson of the elephant. We have no limits apart from those which we place upon ourselves. And the confessions of the rich man. Everything begins and ends with us. The old saying is right. O taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man that trusteth in him. It was the 4th day and I overslept. Surprisingly, no one came to wake me up. I rolled out of bed and took a peek out the front door. The old man was standing in the middle of the village, alone. The village seemed bare and there was an eerie feeling in the air. I closed the door, I quickly dressed, then walked out to see the old man, who by then was sitting on a tree stump protruding from the ground. I greeted him with respect as I would my father, and he greeted me in return, with a nod and a finger directing me where to sit. I took my seat on the floor next to him. He proceeded to teach me with a barrage of questions. How can one govern the world if one cannot govern one's household? How can one be the master of one's house if one cannot master oneself? From where do we come and to where are we going? What is man's purpose in life? After a few minutes of silence, he spoke again. Why do pleasure and pain come hand in hand in life? And why is it so necessary that all life must eventually experience the shocking fate of death? He was speaking as if he was in conversation with an invisible audience. All the while, I was trying to follow his line of questioning. He paused and looked at me to see if I was listening. Then he told me to stop thinking about the answers to these questions and learn Resolve your query to the ultimate question in which all questions merge, he said, before completing his sentence. Who am I? That is the only question. Seeing that I was unable to silence my mind, he reached behind him and produced an old kerosene lantern and a lighter. He placed the lit lantern on the ground in front of me and told me to remain seated and gaze at the flame until I saw the man of wisdom. I had no idea who or what he was talking about, but I did know that I didn't want to be sitting here too long, and I sure wasn't interested in fire-gazing this early in the morning. I sat for an hour or so, and all I saw was a burning wick. There seemed to be some activity happening in the nearby forest, and it was distracting my concentration. Focusing on the flame proved harder than I thought. Another hour passed, and I was starting to burn from the penetrating rays of the rising sun. The old man appeared again with an umbrella for my shade. He asked me if I had seen anything yet. When I said I had not, he knelt down and pressed his thumbnail hard against my third eye until it bled. He told me to focus on the point of pain on my forehead, then smiled and walked away. I could feel the eager anticipation I had of the day's events slowly diminishing. The sudden pain on my forehead now added to the strain, originating from my backside, which was now making its way down both my legs. Constant shifting around to find a suitable sitting position was obviously hindering my concentration. As I closed my eyes and refocused on the third eye, the point of pain, I noticed that I could still see the flame from the lantern. Seconds later, its light merged into the greater light of the sun. Contemplating this, I realized that I simply needed to merge my mind, the flame, with the higher mind, the sun, in order for the greater light of wisdom to be perceived. My mind went blank for a second or two, and when I looked back at the lantern, a young man in Egyptian attire was sitting opposite me. "It seems that you are now ready for learning," he said. He was softly spoken, posture poised and upright, with an overpowering and penetrating energy that seemed to envelop him. "Well, I guess so," I replied half-heartedly. He gazed deep into my eyes as if looking through me, giving me time to at least clear my mind from all my thinking. Who am I? That is the question we will tackle today, he continued. As humans, we consist of 5 primary elements: matter, liquids, gases, energy, and ether, or life force. This becomes a matter of fact when we realize that we need to eat, drink, breathe, and sleep in order to continually replace these elements and survive. The 5th element, or the ether, is simply an invisible magnetic energy body that surrounds us and every living thing on this planet. Without it, our bodies would simply disintegrate. It is the blueprint of this physical reality. What is so special about man, and what is our relationship to God? I asked. Before I answer you, do you understand what I have just said? He queried. Yes, I'm familiar with it already. I was a little embarrassed with myself and my sudden outburst. Still, he remained calm. Let me start by saying that everything is created according to function and form, he continued. The anteater, the fish, the elephant, each form disclosing their individual functions. So now let me ask you, what is the function of man? After a long pause and unable to come up with a worthy answer to his simple question, I replied, I really don't know. The Egyptian master explained, the answer to your previous question of what is so special about man has a lot to do with our vertical spinal column, and even more so to do with our spiritual metaphysical body and its revolving energy centers allocated along the spinal column. Ancient metaphysicians and spiritual scientists have mapped the uniqueness of the human body and its purpose in the elevation of human consciousness from its primal roots to its highest states of consciousness. And it is only recently, in the last 50 years or so, that the world as a whole has taken notice. This is good news because now we know our function and purpose. for the soul to experience itself in its physical state before merging or becoming one with the God mind or higher self once again. At this God level, we are pure conscious intelligence, not just consciousness in its different stages, as is the case when in physical form. What about Darwin's theory of evolution? I challenged. The master replied, this planet has existed for millions of Earth years. Scientists and archaeologists have discovered fossils, human and dinosaur skeletal remains to justify this. The so-called skulls of prehistoric man are merely different species of man, evolving according to the laws of the universe. The first race of man, according to the Akashic records, was a globe, a creature that looked more like jelly. They possessed one eye and no mind at all. The second race of man eventuated when appendages and limbs began to show. Their minds were very basic yet somewhat incomplete. The third race of man began when the globe started to divide itself into two, male and female, their minds now showing instinctive and creative intelligence. The fourth race of man is the Lemurians. They possessed lower emotions much like animals. The continent of Lemuria, according to history, sank into the sea. Earth was still in a stage of development. The Atlantean race, the fifth race of man, followed. They functioned on a higher level of intelligence. Their invention of the atomic bomb was the beginning of their demise. Intelligence without love as a counterbalance is very dangerous, and they too went underwater. Many of their technologies and intelligence was borrowed from aliens. The survivors of Atlantis were infected by some sort of radiation, and people mutated. The Orion race, the sixth race of man, was the result. The Orion race is more materialistic than spiritual. They function more in the abstract. We are the remnant of the sixth race. The young master leaned forward and picked up a pebble, rolling it in his hands before continuing. We are the only planet with human species in this solar system. However, you must remember that not all planets and its residents need air or any of the elements we humans require in order to survive. As for scientific advancements, we have a long way to go. Our stumbling block is that we have not yet integrated science with the metaphysical arts. We are so far only capable of piercing through several layers of the many dimensions and planes of existence in this universe, which is still a monumental forward step for mankind. Current spiritual progressions have been partly due to a shift in the Earth's electromagnetic field and the seventh race of man, though very small in number, now residing here. Jason, now that I have disclosed to you our origin from a human standpoint, I want you to put aside what I have just told you for a moment, as I explain to you where we actually come from and who we really are. Then I'll combine everything said so it will make sense. This is very important for you to know, he stressed. We exist in a thought universe, and we as thought were simply imagined by the self. Our true creation is the activity of the higher mind, or the real self, not evolutionary or otherwise. When the sleeper goes to sleep, it is his mind that creates the dream or the nightmare. When you are in this dream and feeling hungry, you eat a dream apple and immediately your hunger subsides. If you hit your head against the wall, you will feel a dream headache and so forth. Upon waking, you realize that it wasn't you at all that was in the dream. It was all a creation of your own mind. Likewise, everything you perceive in this reality is merely due to your senses. Your senses feed your thoughts, which in turn report to the brain, the conscious mind, an element of the soul. This soul of man, which is invisible, is individualized consciousness, or a unit of consciousness of which our central nervous system and the pranic forces flowing through it are its manifested form. It, the soul, is in essence the real self or cosmic consciousness, the God in man. Then I exclaimed, so what you're actually saying is that we're living in a thought universe dreamt up by a higher mind or self, and that this higher self of which we are part of is dreaming right now. All this is a dream. He replied, that is correct. Think of a time when you had a dream and you saw yourself falling or dying. You suddenly woke up relieved that you were still here. Who was the you that saw the you that was falling or dying? In other words, who was the observer in the dream? I was, I replied. Yes, you are that, and I am that, he said. There was so much to take in. I'm finding it really hard right now to comprehend what you're saying. I think I'm going to need some time just to ponder on it, I said. The Egyptian master continued, good. Now let me go back to our human origins and the races of man, more specifically the seventh race of man. Just as the caterpillar will shed its skin in order to evolve and become the butterfly, so must we. This incubatory process is happening right now. The evolution of man is not physical as some propose, but spiritual. In order for this monumental change to take place, a death or shedding of old ideas and beliefs must be addressed. Love must prevail. Love for God, the God within, and love for all of God's creation, God without. The greatest obstruction to love is the ego and the intellectual mind. All human knowledge is history and past tense. They are merely perceptions that must be replaced with the wisdom of the self. It is our attachments to our beliefs that are preventing us from seeing the bigger picture, and the bigger picture can only be seen through divine love. I had one more question. Master, what is the wisdom of the self? He patiently answered me. Wisdom of the self is knowing that what appears and disappears is not real. Whatever it is, whether it be God in manifested form, some prophet or saintly deity, all concepts of good, bad, heaven, hell, and everything you and I think is real, they are only perceptions, like knowledge. It's all a creation of the human mind. Nothing or no thing is real because things in themselves are impermanent and ever in flux. The only reality then is conscious intelligence, because that is all that remains and never changes. But I believe in God, I said. What you're saying is there is no God, and it's only a concept I and millions of others have created. Once again the Master clarified things for me. God is a three-letter word, and like all words, it is a creation of the human mind. No matter what name we give God, ultimately God is the sea of conscious intelligence of which we are a part of. God has created us in His image, spiritually speaking, meaning we are in essence conscious intelligence. And we have created God in our image, physically speaking, meaning we have given God a form due to our inability at this current stage of world consciousness to think of God without one. Hence the likes of Krishna, Buddha, Jesus or Moses, etc. The fundamental building block for our physical universe, according to current research by leading physicists and scientific institutions, is called the unified field of consciousness. This is God and then some. He was pointing at me and smiling. I was apparently still trying to grasp what he was saying. I still did not quite understand. Great saints and masters like Jesus, Buddha and Krishna claim to be God in human form. How can this God, the creator of vast universes and all there is, become man in every way? The Master told me, you are still seeing God from a human perspective. Why limit your mind to the visible and the possible? Not only is God infinite, He is also infinitesimal. The ocean is limitless. His voice echoed into the distance. Before I could think of any response or question, a light suddenly appeared before my gaze. It hovered over me, then it darted directly towards my face. I fell backwards, somewhat dazed. The old man tapped me on the shoulder and asked me if I was all right. I turned to see where the young Egyptian man was, but the old man told me that I was here alone all this time. He was, however, satisfied that I had seen and was in communion with this wise master. He gave me a hand up and we both made our way to the kitchen. We sat down at the table and he queried me about what I had learnt. I was about to ask him more questions about the master when I realized that his lips had been motionless during our conversation. Being aware of my thoughts, he quickly told me that verbal conversation are the lowest form of communication, prone to misunderstandings. Telepathy is far more reliable and effective, plus there are no secrets. He then turned to me and smiled, saying, "Go, do as you please for the rest of the day. I will see you tomorrow." My two faithful companions accompanied me to my hotel room to pick up some much-needed clean clothing and a few additional extras. We then went into the city, where I shopped and brought a few gifts for the family before arriving back at the village late afternoon. It was a beautiful starry night, and all I could think of was the answer to the question, who am I? In the early hours of the 5th day, I was interrupted from my sleep by a knock on the door. I was hoping whoever it was would go away so I could stay in my warm bed a bit longer, but the knocking became unbearable. I asked whoever it was to come back later, but there was no response. So I asked whoever it was to come in. There was still no response, just knocking. I eventually relented and opened the door. A half-naked boy, about 6 years old, grubby and cold, was standing there, with his hands out begging for money. I was surprised at first, not only because of this time he was up and about, but because I had never seen this kid in the village before. Unable to cater to the child's wants, because I only had credit cards on me, I searched the hut for snacks and remembered that I had a Mars chocolate bar in one of my shirt pockets. As I returned to hand the chocolate bar to the boy, he transformed into the old man. I blinked several times and rubbed my eyes in disbelief as I tried to mentally engage what I had just seen. After taking the chocolate bar, he motioned me to take a stroll with him along the beach. I was still wondering if I was awake or if I was dreaming. As I walked, the old man asked me what I thought of my stay so far. I told him that it was great, but that I was still trying to get my head around the question of who I am. "Jason," he said, "no matter what Prince Charles wears or does not do, he will always be a prince. It's in his blood. You'll always know spirit because you are that." He said it as he pointed to the sky. "Can you tell me about spirit and the spirit world? What is it like?" I asked. The old man replied, "How can I tell you about you? I can only direct you to your own self. It is you who must dive deep in the ocean of spirit in order to retrieve the great pearl of self-realization." I sensed he wanted me to discover the truth of these higher realities for myself. The physical universes are like ice cubes in the vast sea of spirit. The spirit world is no different in essence, just less coarse, more subtle in nature and much refined. He paused for a minute or so before continuing. Those in the spiritual realms are working even more so to bring balance and harmony back into this world. Enlightened beings and great souls are appearing on this planet more now than ever before. This is due to the elevated consciousness of the planet. Humankind is now starting to take control of their destiny, and not the other way around, which is a good thing. The work of many spiritual masters of the past is rapidly bearing fruit. Their wisdom and vibration has propelled man forward and allowed those who have chosen to accept their spiritual purpose in life a quicker and more convenient shortcut to self-realization. The knowledge and disciplines that took many years, and in most cases a lifetime to acquire and master, has now been made more readily available to all true seekers. Divine love is the key to one's truth. Before I could ask more questions, the old man signaled me to refrain. His eyes lifted towards the heavens, and even though he was walking, his mind seemed distant, Giving him time to do whatever he was doing, I glanced around to admire the day's splendor. The sun's bright orange tinge glowed with brilliance across the morning sky, and its reflection scattered with vibrant shade across the ocean horizon. It was a beautiful sight. I turned to see what he was doing and saw a beam of light reflecting off his balding head and slowly descending, illuminating his entire body. I could also hear faint music within my inner ear humming majestically while the heavenly phenomenon unfolded. The old man raised his arms to the sky, and on either side of him soon appeared two very bright lights. A conversation with these astral beings ensued before his body slowly levitated, taking flight across the sea beyond my vision. I glanced around to see if anyone nearby had also viewed this unusual sight, but it was as if I was in a transparent bubble that enabled me to see out, but no one could see in. I took a few steps back from the water's edge, then collapsed on the cushioned sand beneath me, still trying to fathom this incredible experience and why I was witnessing it. The old man appeared on the beach soon after, and when I queried him about what had transpired and where he had gone, he simply told me that he needed to be elsewhere. Nothing else was said. We soon arrived back at the village, and the old man encouraged me to help out in the kitchen area. I was glad to. All day, all I could think and see in my mind's eye was the smiling face of the old man. There was something about him I couldn't put my finger on. No matter what I was doing, whether I was walking, talking, eating, playing, or socializing, all I could see was his face before my inner gaze. The old man's magnetism was more than I could fathom. Who was this saintly man, I thought? Although I had not seen any strange faces in the village during my stay, I was told that a great many visitors from all walks of life and many countries around the world journeyed to see him. His powers were obviously unquestionable, yet he rarely spoke. His actions were childlike and innocent, ever forgiving, playful, and happy. The vast array of questions I challenged him with, I noticed in hindsight, were dissected with simplicity and answered with wisdom, penetrating the heart of the matter. Each response tactfully put together to suit my character and personality. His answers always challenged me into making a positive change in my thought patterns and lifestyle. His very life was a reflection of the deep inner awareness he possessed of his divinity. As I lay my head to rest for the night, I couldn't help but ruminate back to all the nights I had wasted, diluting my head with alcohol and being frustrated with work and life in general. The flood of my old memories soon subsided as the new me took control. It was truly a fantastic feeling to know myself, or should I say, myself with a capital S. Under my pillow, the old man had placed a Mars chocolate bar with a note saying, "Thank you for coming." It was a reminder of the day's unforgettable events. I was woken up on the 6th day by the sound of wailing. Someone in the nearby village had died, and a group of mourners were making their way along the path, not far from my hut. Recognizing the cries of sorrow and sadness, I reached out in love in my usual way, by way of blessing the immediate family. While I was sitting in bed, the spirit of the deceased entered my room. She was crying incessantly. She was trying to tell me that her uncle had raped her and then knocked her unconscious before carrying her to the nearby watering hole where he drowned her. I got out of bed and tried to comfort her. I didn't know what else to do. She asked me to mediate for her, even though I told her I had no experience in resolving complicated matters like these. After a consistent plea for help, I told her that I would consult the old man, who I was certain would be able to assist. I rushed to the old man's hut. Not finding him there, I looked everywhere else, but still couldn't find him. I was about to return to my hut to see if he had visited me, when a man with a machete, the uncle of the young girl, approached me. My mind was racing, trying to think of what to do. Should I run, or should I talk my way out of this? I didn't know what to do, so I just stood there. As the man came closer, a strange feeling came over me. a feeling of being observed as if I was being tested. Then I heard a familiar voice as if coming from a distance, urging me to wake up. The old man was sitting beside me, smiling affectionately as I lay in bed. I was still shaking and apparently talking to myself. I was so glad it was only a dream. He didn't say anything, but I could tell from his gentle smile that he was a little concerned. "Jason, I want you to listen carefully," he whispered. "True power is the realization of your real self. Once this truth is known to you, then all else is known." He paused to give me time to grasp the essence of his wisdom before continuing. "Son, you are not this house," pointing to my body. "Why do you care for it so much? Don't you know that it too will dissolve like everything else around you? Consider how your body has changed from the child you were many years ago to the man lying beside me now. Is it not true that the house has changed, but the resident is still the same? There is no death." After some consideration and reflection, I responded, "I think I know what you're saying, sir." "Not yet, my child," he responded. "To know and not realize is not to know. It is like a mother and child. Her love for her child is without limits and beyond understanding. No amount of intellectual wisdom or logical commentary would suffice in comprehending this love. It is only when one also bears a child of their own would they know that they know. This is realization." I got out of bed soon after, and we both walked to the breakfast hut for our usual meal. Several elders were waiting for us when we arrived. We sat down at our usual places and ate in silence as we usually did. As the normal levitation process unfolded, something out of the ordinary took place, and everyone stopped eating, except for the old man. We all started to fly around the room until we found ourselves seated in different positions around the table. I found myself beside the old man at the head of the table. We soon finished breakfast before making our way to the center of the village, where the old man revealed the day's event. I was to make my way to the top of the mountain. This certain mountain possessed a cave that housed the treasures of the past. I was to sleep there for the night. I knew there was a catch, and I was right. I was later told that an unknown entity which claimed the lives of 3 others also resided in the area and sometimes took refuge in the cave. I went back to my hut to make preparations and have a few serious words with God while I was at it. After some offloading on my part, before accepting whatever will be, I thanked God for the challenge. What else could I do? The cave was a fair distance away, so we went by jeep as far as we could till the road ended. The guides then walked with me several miles in search of a familiar track before saying their goodbyes. I stood for a while amidst the tall bushes and towering trees, just to absorb the atmosphere and meditate on what the old man and I have shared during the past days. I looked up and saw rays of light breaking through the treetops. One particular ray flashed before me, causing me to stumble onto the forest floor. Dazed and surprised, I tried to recuperate, but all I could see were drops of light raining from the sky. The whole forest came alive, literally, and I could see through everything as each drop of light landed on the ground. A multicolored flower emerged, thousands of them. The animals came out of hiding to greet me, and the birds sang so melodiously that I thought I had died. What is happening? I thought. It took several hours, it seemed, before things went back to normal. I didn't know what had happened, and I definitely couldn't explain it, but what I did know was I had to get to that cave as soon as possible before nightfall. I eventually found the cave hidden behind bush and scrub and entered it with caution. It wasn't that big, and there was nothing there apart from a few insects and rotting animal bones. The heat of the day soon gave way to the coolness of the approaching darkness. The beautiful night sky and the deafening silence was a welcoming invitation to my newly formed habit of meditation. I quickly lit a fire to replace the chill in the air before seating myself cross-legged in a meditative pose. As I gazed into the fire with the intention of bringing my mind to focus, I noticed etchings on the ceiling of the cave. They were very similar to hieroglyphics of the Egyptians. As I felt my way around the cave, delighting in this new discovery of history and information of the people that once lived here, a strong gush of wind blew through the entrance of the cave, nearly extinguishing the fire. A large shadow appeared above the cave before making its way down the side of the wall. The cave began to shake as loose gravel was flung from the walls and ceiling. After some time the shadow spoke. "You dare enter my domain. Have you not heard that those who play with fire eventually get burnt? Many men have died for such insolence, and where are they now?" Numbed by the whole experience, I felt a sudden change of emotion. My fear soon subsided as a power within me came to the fore. "You dare speak to me in that tone. Do you know who I am?" I said. "I am the immortal spirit. I am that." There was a pause, a strange silence. "It can't be. You can't be. How can you know? Your time is not yet," he screamed. He was furious. The cave once again shook, but this time the stones and loose debris flew out of the cave as if sucked by a vacuum. The shadow attacked me again and again, but a shield of light that seemed to emerge from the fire had enveloped me completely. The light then expanded until the whole cave was filled with its brightness, removing the shadow forever. A few minutes that seemed like hours soon passed, and the cave once again became silent. The fire returned to its normal size and the air seemed fresh and calm. Once again I gained my composure. I sat down beside the fire and reflected on the night's events, profusely grateful for the divine presence that protected me. As I leant over the fire for added warmth, a thought crossed my mind, causing me to look to the ceiling. Above me was a faded etching of two circles, with one inside the other, and a picture of a child in its center. Directly under this circle was an engraving of a white swan surrounded by lotus flowers and hieroglyphics. Its meaning soon flowed through my mind as if I were its author. The circles represented the sun and the moon, one male and the other female, meaning everything in this physical reality consists of positive and negative elements. One cannot exist without the other in this realm of duality and opposites. The child resembled the son of the sun, or the offspring of light. In other words, this child is a soul or individualized spirit. The word soul derives from the Greek word soul, meaning sun, hence the word solar. And the parent of this child is spirit, or the sun and moon, the source of life. The swan, which swims in muddy or clear waters, represents one who lives in this world of relativity without being affected or tainted by it. And the lotus flowers represent those that are born in darkness but have risen to the light of the sun, with the petals beautifully open and unaffected by the shadows of its past. The hieroglyphics interpreted read, "Pursued by a shadow dream, I awoke from the nightmare. Forever it seemed." A sigh of relief, yet I was fully aware. I am not this clay or from this marble blue, nor my family reeled, hypnotized by senses true. Alas, a smile discerned in depth, silence awakening, the flow of bliss, non-breath, joy, peace, love, being. I am the I in the dream, the light observing the being. I am the fearless one, the son of the sun. I am the lover of hearts, wisdom divine I am. Dwelling in the body of my mother, I am that I am. Lying there alone, looking at the ceiling, I thought about this divine child. Soon memories of my own childhood streamed through my consciousness, and a deep longing to see my mother's beautiful face ached within me. Why does everything have to disappear, I thought. It was like my life was all a dream, passing moments. Was everything really only apparitions? Was this life really a play of lights, and were we merely pawns on the chessboard of life? To what end? Were our perceptions true or just a result of lifelong affiliation to the senses? Like dreams and nightmares, they seem so real until we wake up and they fade to nothing. How could my mind know whether my mind and all its perceptions and findings were also a creation of its perceptions? Slowly my eyes turned to Putty as my overworked brain came to a sudden halt. The exhaustion of the day's events demanded some rest, and I complied. I awoke early on the seventh day to greet the sun and perform my morning meditations before making my way back to the rendezvous point for pickup. I arrived back at the village just before midday. I unloaded the vehicle and then went to see the old man. I was eager to tell him the journey's events, but he was in meditation still. I was told he had been meditating since I left. I started to chant the name of God as he had taught me to do when I needed to talk to him. He soon came back down from his high state of consciousness, which he was so accustomed to. Seeing that I had arrived and was willing to converse with him, he smiled and joined in with the chanting until the chanting had faded from the outer verbal and inner mental repetitions, ultimately fulfilling its purpose of penetrating the conscious, subconscious and superconscious mind. This time we both sank into meditation, our minds and thoughts interlinked. Suddenly an unknown force within me erupted and I felt a great and intense power rushing through my very being as I was catapulted into infinity. My consciousness was all there was. I possessed no body, I was in space, yet I was space itself. Everything was me, lights, galaxies, auroras and solar systems. Everything was the sea of consciousness. My mind was fathomless, expanded to eternity. I was stupefied and bewildered by the enormity of this experience. I had never felt true freedom as this before. There was nothing to compare it with. The old man soon appeared before my gaze and told me it was time to go back. Hearing this, I cried. Resisting the sudden urge to return to this mud ball in space, I begged him to let me be, but he smiled knowingly and lovingly, saying it was not yet time. And although my training was now complete, I still had work to do. Feeling hopeless and helpless, I saw myself once again being pulled down like a balloon by a thread of my own making. There, sitting in meditation, I wept. The pain was heart-wrenching and difficult to take in. The old man lovingly and understandably took my hand and held it till the initial pain of returning to this body prison the experience of ultimate freedom had parted. Opening my eyes to the world around me, I felt disgusted and appalled. I could not believe I was trapped in this body, chained to it like a prisoner chained to a steel ball. The shock of the divinity granted to me by the old man not only transformed me, but it also altered every perception and decision I made from that date onward. For the first time I understood the meaning of anything and everything. The old man looked at me, his eyes beginning to water. I sensed he was about to go away soon, but he didn't know how to tell me. He finally spoke, and there were two men who each wanted to grow a nice green backyard. The first man, after sprinkling grass seeds for several weeks, saw weeds growing amongst the grass and proceeded to pull these weeds out. For weeks he did this until he was finally satisfied that there were no weeds. Unfortunately, there was little grass remaining also. The second man also sprinkled grass seeds in his backyard. He too saw weeds growing in between the grass, but instead of uprooting the weeds, he chose to ignore them and keep sprinkling his grass seeds. Months later, the weeds were nowhere to be seen, and he had a beautiful lush green yard. So, Jason, which person are you? Without requiring an answer, he simply stood up and walked away. While reflecting on the story and its application, I noticed something bright quickly moving towards me from the corner of my right eye. As I turned to see what it was, a strong bolt of light energy knocked me to the floor. The next thing I saw were lights. Lights everywhere. I think he's coming around. His eyes are flickering, someone yelled. The light shifted as the doctor moved the torch away from my eyes and face. I blinked thrice, trying desperately to refocus. A hand grabbed a hold of mine and asked if I was all right. The voice was familiar, so I turned to see if it was who I thought it was. My mother had tears streaming down her cheeks as she launched herself over me with smothering kisses. The nurse's professionalism obviously rendered some timely assistance in this instance. The doctor relayed to me afterwards that I had been in a coma for several weeks before they sent for my mother. I was found on Waikiki Beach unconscious by a kind Samaritan who called the police, imagining the worst. After my recovery and coming to grips with the insights I had had during my physical absence, the doctor declared me fit to return home. Although the visions I had were as real to me as this physical world, the need to play my part to the satisfaction of the medical staff required authenticity. My performance was indeed worthy of an Oscar. I found it difficult to farewell this beautiful island. Unfortunately, it was not because of its idealistic views, but because of the lessons and wisdom I had acquired from its invisible hosts. As my mother and I sat at the airport waiting for our flight to announce its departure, an elderly gentleman approached me and asked if the seat beside me was taken. After I assured him it was free, he sat down and spoke lovingly to my mother in Hawaiian. After a few minutes he stood up, handed my mother a small bag and left. My mother had this great big smile as she opened the bag. There was an eagle's feather, a gold and silver flower, 2 large diamonds, an old lantern, a Mars chocolate bar, an Egyptian scroll, and a packet of buffalo grass seeds. Pinned to the bag was a letter that read, "To my beloved Uncle Jason, thank you for coming. Love you always, Her Highness the Princess of the 4 Kingdoms. P.S. Hope you enjoyed the healing. Our gift to you." My mother, who was now beaming with pride and joy at the return of her son, turned her eyes inwards as she withdrew to an inner realm now known to me. Seeing this and knowing that she knew what I knew made me so happy. This was indeed a priceless gift.